Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Zevachim, Daf Ches, Zevachim 8. And we're going to start Baruch Hashem on the bottom of 7b, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is asking, first of all, today's Daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shvuyim, and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and this is Tzara. So the Gemara says, Chatos mino, and how do we know that a korban chatos has to be brought for the right intent? And if you had the wrong intent by the korban chatos, which is a sin offering, how do you know that the korban is disqualified? By other korbanos, except for the chatos and Pesach, if you have the wrong intent, it's not disqualified. You just don't fulfill your obligation. But the sin offering is disqualified. What's the source? Says the Gemara, it says in the pasuk, you slaughter it for a sin offering. Should just, we haven't made this point enough, but the basic point is, as we're on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, that you need to know why we're repenting. We need to know what we're doing tshuva for. We can't just say, "Oh, I forget. I'm sorry for anything I did wrong." Well, that's not an apology. That's basically saying I didn't apologize. That's basically saying I didn't do anything wrong. If I did anything wrong, well, then you don't think you did anything wrong. So the chatos, you need to have intent to do a sin offering. Shetei shlita Hashem chatos. Ashkan shlita. Okay, fine. We know there are 4 aspects to the service of the offering. There's the shlita, kabbalah, halacha, and zrika. The slaughtering, the receiving of the blood, the conveying of the blood, and the sprinkling of the blood. So we know that the shlita has to be done lishma. Kabbalah, and how do we know the receiving of the blood? So the Gemara says, "Kacha kohen midama chatas." The kohen shall take from the blood of the chatas, which means shetehei kabbalah l'shem chatas. The receiving of the blood has to be done for the purpose of the chatas. Says the Gemara, "Ashkan shlita v'kabbalah." Okay, we know the shlita and the kabbalah have to be done for the purpose of the chatas. Zrika minoah, and how do we know that the sprinkling? The Amar Kra, it says, "V'chipar alav hakohen." The atonement, this i.e. the sprinkling, needs to be done for the purpose of the chatas. Ashkechan shinoi kodesh. So there's 2 aspects of the korban with intent we were discussing. One is shinoi kodesh and one is shinoi ba'alim. Shinoi kodesh is where you change the purpose of the sacrifice, and shinoi ba'alim is you change the person from the sacrifice intent. So we find that the kodesh has to be done with the right intent. Shinoi ba'alim minon. How do we know that the owner of the sacrifice has to be done for the right purpose? Amar Kra, based upon the pasuk, a love. It says, based upon the pasuk, it says that it says in the pasuk, "Devias Hashemo Hashem asher chataso," and then the chiper alav hakawei mechataso. So we see from here alav the lo al chavero. So it has to be done for him and not for his friend. It says the Gemara, fine. Ashkechan. So now we know that it has to be done with the right intent for the right purpose. Ashkechan mitzvah akev minawan. So we have this concept by Kachim, and in order to know that it's requirement, it has to be said twice. Shinoi akosavli kuva. The Torah has to say it twice. The first time is just to tell us that it's the ideal way. And the second time is to tell us that it's a requirement. So we know that it's the ideal way. It's the mitzvah. Akev minon. How do we know that if you didn't do it, it's going to be disqualified? So it says the Gemara, Amar Avuna Braid Rav Yeshua chatas chataso, which says chataso, and says it's chataso. It could have just said chatas. That's telling us it's required. Achinami chatas chataso. Ashcha mitzvah boker tov. Ashkecha mitzvah b'shinoi kodesh, v'zrika b'shinoi ba'alim. Okay, we know that it's a mitzvah by shinoi kodesh, i.e. that it's ideal when you change it's not ideal unless you have it the right intent. And we know that it's zrika b'shinoi ba'alim. And we also know that it's a mitzvah to sprinkle it the right way for the right owner. And there we also know by sprinkling bein mitzvah bein la'akev. Though it's both a mitzvah and essential. B'chol avodos b'shinoi kodesh, v'shar avodos b'shinoi ba'alim, bein mitzvah bein la'akev. So how do we know that? But we're on Ches Amud Aleph, around 10 lines on the top. How do we know by all the other aspects of the sacrifice of the sin offering, that it's ikuva as well. The Jeff, there's a concept of by kodshim, shinoi alav. That's what basically the whole daf is about. Shinoi alav akosav la'akiv. That it needs to be said twice. All the prohibitions. The first is to tell us it's the ideal way, and the second is to tell us that if you didn't do it, it's not good. It's disqualified. So that's why the pasuk says it twice, Akiv, to say it's a requirement. It's not just ideal. You got to say everything twice. How many times do you need to be told something? Twice. Once is ideal. The second is that it's no good. So how do we know all other of all this? So a sin offering. There's different types of sin offerings. There's a sin offering where if you did the penalty, if you did the violation, you get kares. That's what we're talking about. But then Gemara says we're going to learn about the laws of that from the sin offering of a Nazir. A Nazir, when he finishes his period of being a Nazir, he also brings a sin offering. That he didn't do a penalty which gets kares, but it's also called a sin offering. What was the sin of the Nazir? That is a debate, the fundamental debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. Is it that he became a Nazir in the first place, or is it that he stopped being a Nazir? So that's a fundamental dispute between Maimonides and Nachmanides. Maimonides says he never should have been a Nazir. Ramban says he never should have stopped being a Nazir. Anyway, which means it all has to be done. All the activities have to be done for the purpose of the chatas, and if you didn't do it with the right intent, it's disqualified. Okay, we find this by Shinoi Kodesh. If you change the intent of the sacrifice, what about if you change the intent of the owner? So we say, Amar Avuna, B'rei Rav Yeshua, chatas. So we learn now from the fact, could have said chatas, that's chatas. The Maska for Ravina, he challenges this. That same pasuk by the Nazir also says oaso, but we don't say that the oa needs to be done with the right intent, or else it's disqualified. So the Gemara says, well, let's ask a question on Ravina, who challenges about oaso on Rabbi Yonah. So what about the fact that it says also by the Nazir, it says minchas, so it says minchaso nasach nisko. It could have said nasach, it says nisko. My derashtabehu. Well, he doesn't expound those. So the Gemara says, no, those only by the way, minchasam v'niskehem b'layla, minchasam v'niskehem afilu malchus. That's to tell us what accompanying these offerings is a pouring of wine on the altar. So the fact that it's written minchaso and nisko is to teach us that the libation, the grain libation, and the wine libation that accompany it could even be brought on the flour libation. The wine libation can even be at night or the next day. Even that night or the next day. So what would Rabbi Yonah do with the fact that it says olah instead of olas? And now we ask a fundamental question. There are two totally different types of sacrifices. The sin offering, regular sin offering, which is brought for a kares penalty if you would have done it intentionally, and the sin offering of the Nazir are totally different. Chatas Nazir. Well, Gamra. So you can't learn them from each other. Chatas Nazir Gamra. You can't learn out the chatas for eating the non-kosher fat from the chatas for being a Nazir. The chatas Nazir is part of a whole group of karbanos. There's a mincha, an ola, a chatas, and you didn't do a kares penalty. And chatas chaylev, chatas nazir, chatas chaylev gamra. You can't learn out the chatas nazir from the chatas chaylev shekain kares, because the chatas chaylev has kares. Ela Marava, so Rava says you're going to learn out the ikuva by a chatas, not from the chatas nazir, but from the chatas mitzora. Asya mechatas mitzora. This is a sin offering if you were a leper. Again, it's not a kares penalty. Which means the whole thing has to be done for the purpose of chatas. So the Gemara says, well, shinoi kodesh. Okay, we know that if you change the purpose of the Nazir's chatas, it's no good. But shinoi ba'alam minalei. But what if you change the owner? So the pasuk atones for the one who is needing atonement. Al mitaher zev al mitaher chaver, but not if you change the person. But we have the same question. How can you learn out chatas chela from chatas mitzora? Two totally different types of karbanos. Akati miyafe me'adadi. How can you learn them out? Chatas chela and chatas mitzora. Well, yalfa, you can't learn out the chatas chela from the chatas mitzora. Shkin yeshima dama macherim, because the chatas mitzora has other sacrifices that accompany it. And chatas mitzora and chatas chela gamra. You can't learn out the chatas mitzora from the chatas chela. Shkin kares michada. Shekain kares, because the chatas chaylev is kares. So the Gemara says, "Mechada lo asya, teisichade mitarti." So the Gemara says you can't learn out the chatas chaylev by a direct comparison to Nazir Mitzorah, but you can learn out by comparing it to both of them and learning out from the characteristics. The Gemara says, but you can only learn out in that manner if one of them it didn't need to be written. Which one could have gotten away without writing it? And from the fact that it wrote it, it means it's extra. The Gemara says, "Well, maybe the Torah didn't need to write it by the chatas chaylev, and we could have learned it out from. Maybe the Torah didn't need to learn it out from the chatas chaylev, and we could learn it out from the Nazir and the Mesorah. You can't. Why? Those karbanos have other karbanos that accompany them." Well, maybe it didn't need to write it by a Nazir and learn out Nazir from Mitzorah and Chaylev. Gemara says, no. Okay, so the Nazir has a unique law that it has She'ela associated. What She'ela? That you could go to the Chacham and say, listen, I regret becoming a Nazir, and you could know it, so retroactively you were never a Nazir. And that is what we're going to do this morning. Not about the Nazir, but we're going to do this morning. We're going to do Hataras Nedarim, annulment of the vows. That's called She'ela. So you can't learn out Nazir from Chatas and Mitzorah, Chatas Chaylev and Mitzorah, because it has this unique law. So maybe you don't need to write it by the Chatas Mitzorah, but and you can learn it out from Nazir and Chaylev. The Gemara says, no. No, the Mitzorah has a unique leniency that if you're poor, you could bring a lesser offering. So therefore, that if you're poor and you're a mitzorah, you could bring a bird as opposed to a big animal. How do we learn out that the chatas is essential? We learn out from Zos HaTorah L'Olam Mincha. Kisha HaKosav L'Shlamim. It says in the pasuk, this is the law of the Olah, the Mincha. Basically, the Torah compares the chatos to the shlamim. Just like by the shlamim, we need it lishma by the code, by the korban and the owner. With mitzvah to ideally, mitzvah. And the whole concept of chatas being ideally for the right intent, we learn out from comparing it to the korban shalomim. And helkach mitzvah mishlamim. So therefore, the idea of an ideal offering, we learn out from shlamim. Cry, and then the pasuk we cited above, and then alav, and then chataso. That is la'akev. So that's to tell us that it is completely required. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, we know the chatas chaylev is going to be likuva, but it says the word chatas, fine, but chatas davodas kochavim, and the shmias kol, bitois vasayim, tumas mikdash v'kadashav. So there are other types of chatas that you bring for a sin offering, for a kares penalty, that you bring for a sin. There's chatas davodas kochavim, which if you sin idolatry, you get kares. There's chatas of shmias kol. That's where you deny knowing a testimony about somebody and you took an oath and now you admit it. Ubitois vasayim, where you took a false oath. Tumas mikdash v'kadashav, where you enter into the state of temple where you're ritually impure. Where it doesn't say this word chataso. So therefore, how do we know it has to be done lashma mino? And how do we know that if you change the kodesh or you change the ba'alim, it's disqualified? So the Gemara says, chatas yavodas kochavim asya mechatas chaylev shekain charis kamosa. The chatas of idolatry is very similar to chaylev because they're both a penalty of kares. V'hana kuli asyan from outside, and the others we learn out by sharing by learning out all the common denominator traits amongst them all, and so therefore we know that they're all required. What are the commonalities? So Rashi goes through it all. Mechatas chelev, chatas nazir, mitzvah. We learn them all out by comparing it to chatas chelev, chatas nazir, and mitzvah. To those three. The chiparachta, because your question was mal chatas chelev shekim pares. So, because your question was chatas chelev is different because that gets kares. Well, chatas nazir mitzvah yochichu. They don't have kares. Mal chatas nazir mitzvah shekin yeshiman dem lacherem. So they have other karbanos. So chatas chelev tochech that doesn't have other karbanos. What's the common denominator? The common denominator is all that they're all chatas. Avani avi chatas d'shmiya sakol. So I'll include the chatas of where you deny testimony. So Rashi goes through them. And from chatas chelev, and one of these we can't learn it out because chatas chelev nazir we could challenge it, and so basically Rashi goes through why you need all three. Okay, so now we come on to the next question. There's this, sometimes you have in the Gemara such a phrase that's so perfect that you start to cry out of the perfection of the phrase. Listen to this next phrase. Tana Rabbanan, Pesach bizmano l'shmo kosher, shelo l'shmo pasol, b'shar yemos hashanah l'shmo pasol, shelo l'shmo kosher. Oh, what a beautiful phrase. Let me just go back and see what, and touch it up. So the Korban Pesach is supposed to be brought on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. And the rest of the year, if there was a Korban Pesach that somehow wasn't brought the rest on Erev Pesach, then it becomes a Korban Shlamim, which is just a regular offering that could be brought, and the owner eats the meat, and the Kohen eats the meat, and the Be'ach gets on the meat. Now the Gemara says, a Pesach Bismano, let's say you bring the Korban Pesach in its proper time, on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, Lishmo kosher. If you have the right intent there, i.e. for Pesach, it's kosher. Shelo lishmo, but if you have the wrong intent, i.e. on Erev Pesach, you intend to bring it to something other than a Pesach, pasol, it's disqualified, because that's what our first Mishnah said. Ubishari Mos Hashanah, but the rest of the year, lishmo pasol, that of the rest of the year, if you bring this Korban Pesach for the purpose of a Korban Pesach, then it's disqualified, because it's no longer a Pesach. And shelo lishmo, but the rest of the year, if you bring it with the wrong intent, i.e., you don't bring it for a Pesach, which is actually the right intent, then it's kosher. Initially, it was a Pesach. So we see from here that it's all timing. Everything is timing. And right now is the time. Right now is the time to do teshuvah. Now is the time. It's all timing in life. It's all timing. You got to get the timing right. So the Gemara says, Minani Mili, what's the source of this idea that a Pesach, the rest of the year, that you slaughter Shalol Shema, i.e., not for a Pesach, so you take a Pesach and then it goes on beyond Pesach, and now you slaughter it. How do you know that it's, but you don't slaughter it for a Pesach, you slaughter it for Shalom, how do you know it's kosher? See, it's so ironic. Pesach Shalol Shema is kosher because you're not slaughtering for Pesach. Where I said, Amravua Tishmo, Amakravim, Minatzon Karbano, Zevach Shamim Hashem. Iminatzon Karbano, which is from the sheep, it's a Pesach, Zevach Shamim Hashem. Meaning to say, Davar Abaminatzon, that's something that comes from the sheep, i.e. the Paschal lamb, Zevach Shamim, well, it should be for the rest of the year for a Shlomim. The Gemara says, Ema Shlomim Midiachrin. Maybe if you brought it for a Shlomim, it's okay, but if you brought it for a different Karban, it's no good. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, was Zevach or Rabbas called Zevach. No, any intent. If you take this Pesach the rest of the year and you slaughter it for any other offering, it's kosher, except for Pesach. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, so he says, Zevach or Rabbas called Zevach. Ema called the Shachet Lahavikamos. So okay, maybe if you slaughter the Pesach for another Karban, it will become that other Karban the rest of the year. The Gemara says, if it would say l'shlamim for a Zevach, that would be like you said, but Hashad Zevach Shlamim. So now that we say Zevach Shlamim, it means call the Shachalei Shlamim Lahavi. Whatever you slaughter for the rest of the year will be a Shlamim. Emo is Zevach. So now we have something which we said earlier. Emo is Zevach Klal Shlamim Prat Klal Prat Emo Klal Mashabet Prat. So maybe we have this rule of a general followed by a specific, which means it's only the specific. Shlamim in Midi Achrin alone. Maybe it's only the Shlamim, not anything else. And Mar says no. It says at the end of that pasuk Hashem. Hadar v'kol. It has to be an offering for Hashem. So it means to say for any carbon. So maskif wa Rabbi Yaakov min harpakod. Hello, dami kol basar kol kama. But the two generalities in the verse are not the same to compare them. Kol kama marbi Zevachim. The first generality includes all sacrifices. This duo and nothing else. Kol basar Hashem. Called to Hashem, I feel awful. The second part of the generality includes even birds, not just the animals. Vafil menachos, and even a grain offering. So the Gemara says, no, we learned already this at the beginning. The Bryce Rabbi Shmuel says you can do a call prat to call in this manner. You have to danel ke'ena prat, not prat before shul lo shmo v'kosher. So just like the specific, i.e., if you start the Pesach for Shlomim, it's shelo shmo and it's kosher. Av kol shu shelo shmo is kosher. Also, if you slaughter anything, the Pesach for any other animal, it's kosher. Maybe the prat is something specific. It's something that could come, like a shlomim could come as a neder and a dava. Av kol abba neder and dava, and then it would mean oh shlomim in chatas Hashem lo. So maybe it means if you slaughter the Pesach for a Pesach, it's okay, but if you slaughter it for a sin offering or a guilt offering, it wouldn't be okay. So therefore, the Gemara is going to have to give a different reasoning how we know that if you slaughter the Pesach for any other korban, it's still going to be kosher after Pesach. If after Pesach you slaughter the Pesach for any other korban, it's going to be kosher. That's the daf yomi for Erev. That's the daf yomi for Rosh Hashanah. I mean, we'll stop the recording here because that's the daf, but we could